Over to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen and before we go to the source packet, I wanted to, here we have, let's see, I have to do something to enlarge this. Right, second, here we are. Okay. Can everybody see this? Yes, okay. So I was asked I think I was asked last week about how realistic is my approach. I'm actually, this is not an approach that I think is going to be implemented tomorrow, obviously. But there's an overriding concern here. And I actually found an article just the other day that in many ways summarizes all that I'm trying to achieve. The title of the article is "The Great Sin of Today is the Politicization of Our Judaism," which is I've been talking about, right? How religion has been used to promote political goals. The great need, the Judaization of our politics. That's what I'm after, the Judaization of our politics. In one sentence, we could close the discussion, 3 sessions, 1 line, the Judaization of our politics. Now, the subtitle of the article is Leon Roth and the Possibilities of a Jewish Critique of Zionist Politics. So I want to show you an example of what I've been talking about and understand why it's relevant. Leon Roth was a professor of philosophy. He's Cecil Roth's older brother. If you know the name Cecil Roth, the great Jewish historian. He was trained at Oxford. He left England in 1928 to found the Department of Philosophy at the Hebrew University. He engaged in a major Zionist project, which was the translation of the classics. He created philosophy as a possibility in modern-day Israel, meaning if you wanted to read Aristotle in Hebrew, Roth translated it. He, Samuel Hugo Bergman, his partner in the Department of Philosophy, and students did the work of Plato, Aristotle, the later classics, the European philosophers. So he was immersed in this new enterprise to create an environment of Jewish learning in the new Jewish state. In 1952, all of a sudden he left. That's a separate parsha. That's a separate discussion. Why he left, we don't exactly know. He didn't write. We think we know why he left. It was just his heart was broken. Okay, but that's not our discussion. What happened in 1953 was there was a massacre of Palestinians, Arabs, in a village called Kibbia, because there had been terrorist raids that had killed a mother and two children, innocent Israelis, and the government decided that they needed a deterrent attack. Ariel Sharon led his group, I think it was Unit 101, on a raid. They blew up the homes in the village of Kibbia. They claimed they didn't know that there were people in the home. 69 women and children mostly died. No soldiers, all innocents died, and there was an international uproar. Leon Roth had by then left Israel, but he wrote a letter to the Jewish Chronicle, was part of an ongoing dialogue, and actually it was more than a dialogue. There were responses and counter voices going on for about 2 months on the pages of the London Jewish Chronicle. So this is part of Roth's letter that he wrote to the Chronicle. There is, for example, the religion or the system of thought called Judaism. And there are two, the non-Israeli Jews, considered either in themselves or insofar as they represent or profess Judaism. The problem is whether either Judaism or Jewry can acquiesce in this incident, meaning in this terrorist raid. It is the type of action which we have been accustomed to say that Judaism taught the world to condemn, and from which Jewry itself has so often suffered. If we identify ourselves with it now or condemn its condemners, where will Jewry be the next time it itself is the victim? And what will Jews be able to say the next time Judaism is attacked? Shall we be able to say that we demand one law for all, that we do not do to others, and we do not wish others to do to us? That the lex talionis, meaning an eye for an eye, is not Jewish? That we abhor the spilling of blood, even of animals? That we are commanded in the Pentateuch to care for the non-Jew, love the stranger, as was noted by the rabbis of another day 36 times? Shall we be able to say that an institution of properly constituted courts or the investigation of crime is one of the fundamental moral requirements of Judaism, that the Torah bans private revenge and insists on the due process of law, that fathers should, etc., he goes on. Dare we repeat the old commonplace of which we were once so proud, that Jewish courts were so careful to avoid the shedding of blood that they disallowed all circumstantial evidence and in practice all but abolished the death penalty? If kindness to animals is the essence of shchita, right, ritual slaughter, and we resent any breath of denigration of that venerable institution, can we cry out against honest and liberal-minded men and women, even of other religions and types of thought, who on the grounds taught by Judaism recognize an Israeli action for what it is, an act of terror? The real tragedy is, of course, for the Israelis, and it does not lie in the political deterioration of their borders, it lies in the moral deterioration of their souls. What manner of men are these who would contrive this action? Or what persons could carry it out? And what manner of men are those who arrogantly, dismissing the moral issue, bemuse themselves and us with their realpolitik? Where terrorism is used as an instrument of policy, the worst consequences fall on those who use it. Such a Jew, and there must be many of them, would, I fear, search in vain. And I had been told that the new state of Israel was founded on justice and love. Let me hear what the world says before I condemn my people and my religion. Perhaps I am too obtuse or too sensitive. That's what some people say. Such a Jew, and there must be many of them, would, I fear, search in vain for even the half-hearted approval of the Kibbutz incident. He would have probably heard it condemned in the same terms as the incidents of Lidice and Oradea, where the Nazis slaughtered innocents as an act of revenge. And I am afraid, whole towns, hundreds of people, and I'm afraid it is no use our saying, look what is being done by their own people in this place or that. Why don't Jews raise their voices there? Why just against us? In the first place, two wrongs do not make one right. And secondly, is it not perhaps a compliment to Jews and Judaism that our friends say to us, we expected better of you? Wow. And secondly, we expected better of you. So maybe this whole business that was concocted as a way of delegitimizing criticism of Israel on the basis of it being a double standard, and we've all accepted that, it's a double standard, they hate the Jews, they hate Israel. Maybe that's not the moral way of thinking. The moral way of thinking is that basically we demanded this standard of ourselves, and we should adhere to the standard that we've set for ourselves. And it's not for us to reject the criticism on the grounds that other people don't behave or don't act in this way, because this is what we expect out of Jews and out of the state of Israel. All right, so that's the background. I wanted you to see that this whole critique emanating from the religious domain is not something that's unique to me, that's something strange, that has been brought to bear before, that it should become part of our conversation. And if someone has some questions about this, I hope that they'll be raised later on as we attempt to go through the sources. Please, I'm going to have to stop the share and then start up again. It'll take me a second. Okay, let me see where the other. Okay. We now share my screen, and here we have a return to Zion. Okay. Where are we? Sorry, I have to just scroll through to get to where we left off last time. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Okay. All right. So we do have a lot to cover to conclude, and I'm going to simply do Rashi Prakim, some headlines on some of the sources and some of the issues. So one of the issues that needs to be addressed as a value orientation and as a practical matter is the end to the occupation. Now here, look at what Yitzhak Rabin wrote to Jonathan Sachs. I know that there is no long-term answer to our security problems and to our coexistence with our neighbors other than peace. For the sake of our children and grandchildren, we cannot forfeit this historic opportunity. I have said many times that we did not pray for nearly 2 millennia for the return to Zion, only to find ourselves ruling over 2 million Palestinians or creating a binational state. I know that you share this view, right? So, and I wrote back. I wrote this in 2008. So it's a long. So it's almost 20 years ago that I wrote this. Right? Is that true? Yeah. And about the occupation. I wrote the occupation is the greatest catastrophe to befall the Jewish people in the aftermath of the Holocaust. In fact, I think that the occupation, just on practical grounds, delegitimizes the state of Israel, because if we claim, as I write here, that Ofra and Shiloh, the settlements, are the same as Haifa and Tel Aviv, then the international community says to us, yes, and if you say this, we know that Ofra and Shiloh are illegitimate because they are settlements made up of civilians that you've introduced in conquered territory, which is illegitimate internationally. And if you equate Haifa and Tel Aviv with illegitimate settlements, then Haifa and Tel Aviv are themselves illegitimate. So the settlers may be the worst enemies of the state of Israel, not only practically because of their militaristic and violent behaviors, but because the very notion of settlement undermines the argument and the legitimacy of Israel. And of course, what it does is it presents us to the world in the worst possible light. The settlers and their compliant Israeli government that have supported them have succeeded in overturning 2,000 years of a tradition of justice for the other and in transforming the Jewish people into an oppressive occupier. The settlement movement has corrupted the people of Israel to the point that the ideals that inspired the creation of Israel have withered, and the moral voice of the Jewish tradition has been compromised. The occupation is the most un-Jewish of projects, a desecration of God's name. We all bear the burden of guilt and can gain atonement by devoting our considerable energies to the struggle to end the occupation. Otherwise, into the future, the state of Israel will remain as a reminder to humanity, not that a people has risen from the ashes with a vision of hope and justice, but that given the opportunity, the Jewish people has acted no differently from any other conquering power. It's so hard to say these words. I mean, but nevertheless, I think that we have to hear them. Are we any different? What are we doing? Where is our voice? Where is our voice? Right? Instead, the voice that's been raised just in this past war, just listen to the voice that's been raised. This war in Gaza is not a marginal thing, says Rabbi Levinstein, who's a rabbinic advisor in the army, in the armed forces, and we should not view it as a mistake or a mishap, which we would have preferred to avoid. The war is a great thing, and at the end of the day, brings a great message to humanity on its wings. What's the message that it brings? Well, Rabbi Tarragan, who actually was a teacher of my son when he was in Israel learning, Rabbi Tarragan writes, "This war has uncovered many enemies of our people, from the battlefields of Gaza to USA campus quads to the capitals of Europe. We cannot let their vicious hatred fill us with contempt for humanity. In Yirtzeh Hashem, with God's help, this war will help us secure our presence in our homeland and will advance the messianic era we so dearly covet. The murderers and their accomplices will be eliminated. The rest will be re-educated. We know all about re-education. Moshiach will come, Shiloh will come, we will wait." So the messianic forces that have been promoted by Rabbi Kook the Elder and Rabbi Kook Jr. have overtaken the practical elements of Israeli politics and have pushed the army from the extreme to see this as sort of a normative goal. We are engaged not merely in defending ourselves, we're engaged in a messianic project to conquer land, to make sure that we can fulfill our dream at the expense of those people who live there. Now, you'll challenge me about, after all, the people who live there have engaged in terrorist acts. We'll come back to that before we conclude today. And if I don't, please raise that question and we'll respond. But there's something amiss in our entire approach. It's not merely a military self-defense. There's an ideology. There's a religious ideology. That religious ideology needs to be countered. What I want you to feel is that, and have a sense of confidence, that religious ideology is not the only opinion. It's not the only way to think about how to approach. On the contrary, that we need to use the religion as a counter to that religious ideology and to the politics of extremism. Just as Leibovitz said to Avi Ravitsky, it is very important that in the framework of any well-ordered state, there is an opposition within it, a power that acts as a brake against the government. And I think that if religion has any political function, then perhaps this is its function, to be the fundamental opposition to the government, to tell the government you are not the highest authority. So that's where I'm coming from, the Judaization of politics, the introduction of Jewish values that emanate from our tradition, not the imposition of Torah on the state of Israel, but the introduction of ideas that are counterpoint to the militaristic aims of some of the extremists, and that actually introduce morality into the conversation as a way of restraint. And again, not because I think that the politicians will listen to precisely to what we say, but the conversation is bound to have an impact. And in the absence of the conversation, then there's no impulse to actually reshape, to reform one's behavior. So there's no critique. When there's no critique, then there's no motivation. So we have a responsibility to introduce the critique, not because we think that our critique is going to be the one that's going to be practiced, but because the critique might be heard in a way that will somehow influence the decision makers. So what is this religious tradition that I'm talking about that preaches restraint and that promotes a sense of compassion and anti-militarism? So the founder of religious Zionism was a man named Rabbi Yitzhak Yaakov Reines, and he was a Lithuanian, like many of the other rabbis that we've seen. He founded the Mizrahi Merkaz Ruchani, the religious Zionist party, which became the religious Zionist party in 1903. And with a lot of opposition from many of the rabbis, maybe even most of the rabbis of his time, most of the leading rabbis. And what was his argument? He wrote as follows: the dominion, he's getting back to that legend or that midrash about the sword and the book. The dominion of the sword and the spear and the dominion of Torah and wisdom are like non-being and being, as being always follows close upon non-being. And when non-being comes to an end, being and reality always come straight after, separated only by the blink of an eye. And when the dominion of the sword and destruction disappear from the world, the dominion of Torah and wisdom will take its place. The Bet Midrash, I mean, think about, by the way, what Achad Ha'am had to say about the values of Judaism for 2,000 years and what they brought into the world and this antagonism to violence. The Bet Midrash is a manifest protest against wars and warriors, against instruments of destruction and weapons. The whole purpose and desire of such a house is to smash swords into pieces, to shatter spears and all other weapons into smithereens, to melt them down and use them to make pens. Pens with which scribes may write the fundamentals of Torah and wisdom, spread peace, and make salvation bloom in the land. There is no greater blasphemy than to bring instruments of destruction into the house of Torah and wisdom. Pens. So what Rabbi Reines is saying, it's brilliant, because some of you are familiar. You know the verse in Isaiah, V'chetetu charvotam li'itim. What? You will beat your swords into plowshares. The Hebrew word for plowshares or hoes is itim. Itim is spelled Aleph, Taf, Yud, Mem. Rabbi Reines is a marvelous homileticist. He says, indeed, itim is spelled Aleph, Taf, Yud, Mem, but I hear in itim, etim, pens, written ayin, tet, Yud, Mem, meaning you will smash your swords into pens. Not like Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook said, that we have an equivalency. There are two values. One value is the sword, and the other value is the book, and we need a balance in order for us to survive. Rabbi Reines says, on the contrary, we don't need a balance. In order for us to survive, we must make sure that the book overrides the sword. It doesn't mean that we don't have a sword, but we have to know that the sword is a last resort. The sword is not a value. The sword is something that we are forced to use, not something that we choose to use. Right? That was always what we were taught. And the overriding value is derived from the book that teaches us what our goals are, how to shape the use of the sword, what are the limits on the use of the sword. That we derive from the book. Moreover, and here I mean, this is really the argument that he's making. It's an argument that later on Rabbi Amiel, who I'll introduce, also is making, which is that the power of the sword is ephemeral throughout history. Empires have come and empires have gone. Dominant powers have receded from the stage of history because they were overwhelmed at some point by another power. If it's a power game, then it's then the battle, the tension continues without end. What we do know is, he said, that although powers leave the stage of history, the teachings of the book remain forever. So that if you worry about the fact that the book is obviously weaker than the sword, he said, don't worry, because the teachings of the book are everlasting, those values, whereas the sword's accomplishments are themselves fleeting. And they themselves don't last. And you always have to use more power and more power if that's your ultimate value in order to dominate. So we have to internalize this lesson. This was continued by I don't know that I can read all, but this another very important rabbi, Rabbi Avraham Yehuda Chen, who actually was a leader of the religious Zionists and himself connected to Chabad. Interestingly enough, he wrote the following: Judaism now has a singular task, and the hour is a singular hour. We must fulfill our greatest assignment of, they shall beat swords into plowshares. Jerusalem must become a state based on the idea of universal peace. Then all the altars we have built until now, and all the altars we will build now, will be fitting for us. Tools of ambush and death cannot turn us into the agents of this task. Right? Rabbi Chaim, the significance of the Jewish aspiration to reach a state of nation shall not take up sword against nation is no honor for Jewish armament. He's extreme. No national victory. No Israeli flag flying in all the ports. Rather, in other words, that's not the goal. Right, we need a flag, but that's not the goal. Rather, the goal is the nullification of the very phenomenon of victory, the nullification of the doctrine of warfare and its study, the very nullification of instruments of violence. That is the desire of the soul of Judaism. What a lofty goal. What a worthwhile value to pursue, that we can be a model of how to pursue justice in the world. That's what we told ourselves. That's what our tradition told us. That's what he's looking for. I just want to mention this idea of no Israeli flag flying. I'm not an opponent to the Israeli flag. What I do have trouble with is what's become a common practice, and that is Jews wrapping themselves in an Israeli flag as if it were their tallis. I don't know where that comes. I must say I don't know where it comes from, other than it's like the tallis. Where does that come from? I see the students, I've watched the students doing this. I don't say much. I mean, I'm talking to you in ways in which I actually don't share this publicly, because I think people will misunderstand and will condemn and so on. But no one raises a voice. When did it happen that we as Jews began to wrap ourselves in the flags of nationalism? Didn't we know, or don't we know, that those are the very flags that oppressed us throughout history? We respect the flag. We don't wrap ourselves in the flag. It's not our garment, right? That's all right. And when the flag is wrong, we have to condemn it. the problem with wrapping yourselves in the flag, it seems as if you're wrapping yourselves in holiness and attributing holiness not only to the flag as an instrument itself, but to the nation that it represents. That's the problem with this, with nationalism gone awry. Now, my hero in my studies is Rabbi Moshe Avigdor Amiel. I've mentioned him before, I think. He was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv from 1935 to 1946. He defeated two colleagues in order to achieve this position. One was Rabbi Herzog, the grandfather of the current president of Israel, who became the chief rabbi of Israel, and was the chief rabbi at the time of the establishment of the state. And Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, my teacher, was defeated by Rabbi Amiel in the election for chief rabbi of Tel Aviv in 1935. And Amiel was a great ethicist and also a brilliant orator and darshan, homileticist. And he writes the following about Amalek. First, I do need to share a Hebrew text that I have here. One second. Let me see if I can. Yeah. Okay. Can you see this? Can you see the Hebrew text? No?
No.
No. Okay. So that's not good. One second. I have to. I guess what I have to stop share and then share again. Right.
Probably.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to share again. And here we have. Okay. All right. So it's only one paragraph. So I'm sorry. Here it is. Why can't I scroll? Okay, here. All right. So I'm going to just read this paragraph and translate. Says Rabbi Amiel, Ve'omnam, Hashem yitbarach eino oheliv milchamot me'olam. Indeed, God blessed be God, does not like wars ever. Ve'adarabba, on the contrary, Shalom shmo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shalom is God's name, the Holy One's name. Achein, milchama achat hichriz lemilchemet mitzvah. But there is one war that God declared to be a obligatory war. Listen to this. Zohi hamilchama im milchemet Amalek. That's the war against the war of Amalek. Hamilchama neged hamilchamot bichlal. God declared war against all wars. God declared war against all wars. That's his understanding of Judaism. Right? So we're going to go back now to the text in English that I have here. If I still have it, here it is. Okay. So Rabbi Amiel says, even a superficial reading shows Amalek to be the symbol of militarism, for whom the sword served not only as a means, but also as the purpose of life, or rather the entire content of Amalek's life. So Rabbi Amiel introduces a novel, innovative understanding. When it says in the Torah that we're obligated to wipe out Amalek, it's a war not against a people or any human being named Amalek, but a war against what Amalek stands for, which is militarism. It's a war against militarism. How do we fight that war? We fight that war with a book, right? Because it says in Exodus, Ketov Zot Basefer, write this in a book that you have to fight against Amalek. These are people who go to war not out of necessity when they have no other choice, but rather as if going to a dance. Only in war do they find a place where they can show off and highlight their power and being. So in other words, these are people who use warfare to demonstrate their power, their dominance. It's about warfare being an option. It's a political option, a tool that's used in order to be able to declare that we are the supreme. We are supreme. The eternal will be at war with Amalek in all generations. And in the words of the sages, the sword and the book descended from heaven intertwined again. Amalek was granted a greater share of the sword than other peoples, and Israel of the book. And one can only, we were granted a greater share of the book, and one can only be built from the destruction of the other. When one is ascendant, the other falls. Therefore, there is a perpetual war between Israel and Amalek. What means do we use to fight the Amalekites and all masters of the sword? How can we think to put an end to militarism in the world? After all, in our day, with our own eyes, we have seen a commanded war of that type, the Great War that was fought under the banner of a war to end all wars. The consequences of this war are all too well known to everyone. Indeed, under Jewish procedural, I'll skip this. When Judaism declared war on militarism, it was not through militarism. Rather, the Eternal said to Moses, write this as a memorial in the book. This means that the war against the sword is fought by the book. The book of paper and parchment will endure longer than all the swords made from many kinds of metal. It will defeat all the swords and cannon tools in the world. All will be beaten and scattered to the wind, and the book shall reign alone. So that's Rabbi Amiel's great insight. He goes further, and he says, the form of the old idolatry is the new modern nationalism. For buried deep within it are those idols of the nations, each nation believing in its particular God that would save it from its enemies, who had other gods. Nationalism with a capital N is based on the materialistic view of the world, which sees in everything only the triumph of brute force, and justice belongs to the strongest. All in all, Zionism has brought about a kind of Copernican revolution in the world of Judaism. That is to say, if in the past God and the Torah was central to all thoughts of Judaism, and we ourselves, the people of Israel, and all the more so the land of Israel, danced around that center, Zionism has reversed the situation. The land of Israel has become the center of all centers, and on the other hand, even the Torah and God, as it were, have been demoted to the periphery. For the Israelite nation harbors the utmost hate for war, even defensive war, and if it at times has no choice but to apply the undisputed halacha of warfare as ruled that if a person comes to kill you, kill him first, he does so with sorrow and regret. Okay? So that's the point. That's the point that I'm after. I know that sometimes wars are necessary, but are wars fought with sorrow and regret? Do we understand that? Do we remember the words of Yitzhak Rabin when he was honored at the Hebrew University in 1967 after the Six-Day War, and the sorrow and the regret that he expressed? Even Golda Meir, who never recognized the Palestinians, but nevertheless expressed sorrow and regret about the need to go to war. We no longer hear sorrow and regret. That's all I'm asking for. You can tell me, Chaim, you're wrong. Your whole effort to say we need, you need to have a soft heart and whatever you want to criticize about this representation of the book against the sword. I can hear some of the critique. Nevertheless, the one thing I'll stand by is what Amiel said here, that we don't engage in our community in expressing sorrow and regret that we have to engage in decimating another people, in killing them, and in engaging in our own militaristic effort. That's been lost in our conversation. And in losing that, we lost something in the character of who we are as a people. We lost something in the nature of Zionism as a result. That's what I want to recover. I want to recover that voice that tells us that be careful when you have to go to war. Be careful when you're fighting. Understand that lives are at stake. All lives are holy. We can't proceed without, as a Jewish state, without having that in our minds. That's what Rabbi Amiel is calling for. Okay. Now, unfortunately, when you have a state, national interests are often raised as supreme, as Ben-Gurion himself said in 1951. There is nothing more important, more precious, and more sacred than the security of the state. If all the great ideals of the world are placed on one side of the scale and Israel's security on the other, I would choose without any hesitation the security of Israel. So survival is presented as the ultimate value. That's a problem. That's an issue. Because could it be that I don't feel that survival is a value? Absolutely not. Is it the ultimate value? Is it the ultimate value? Says Rabbi Amital. Rabbi Amital, not Rabbi Amiel, Rabbi Amital, who was the head of the yeshiva in Alon Shvut in Gush Etzion, he himself a student of Rabbi Kook, a survivor of the Shoah, right? Says as follows: if there was a single point of light in the Holocaust, it was this. There were two camps there. On one side, the camp of the murderers, and on the other side, the camp of the murdered. Happy are we. This is a survivor speaking. Happy are we that we belong to the camp of the murdered. Here, heavens and earth can testify on our behalf. If the nation of Israel had been given the opportunity to reverse roles, the nation of Israel would have said that it is preferable to be among the murdered than among the murderers. Survival is not an ultimate value. This is a historical point of light that cannot be overshadowed. So this is the struggle, and that's why a religious voice is important. Yes, Ben-Gurion, you're the prime minister. You have to go on, you have to promote the security of the state. That's your obligation. But to check the extremism that might be a consequence of your promoting survival, maybe at all costs, what does that mean, survival at all costs, right? Rabbi Amital comes forward and says, remember, I'm a survivor, I am a victim, and I understand that the value of my struggle to survive is about the fact that I stand for something greater than survival. And that's the values that have been introduced by my tradition. And I'd always want to be among the murdered rather than among the murderers. For 2 millennia, he writes, we were the victim. And suddenly we have changed from being the victim to being the ruler. Now, as we come to deal with those over whom we rule, even if they are hostile to us, it is incumbent upon us to apply practically all of the lofty concepts of morality and humanity that we developed when we were ruled over by others, right? This is a direct response to Ben-Gurion and to classical Zionism, because classical Zionism, as presented by Ben-Gurion and the labor version, was one that skipped from the Bible to the 19th century, as if 2,000 years were 2,000 years of embarrassment. This is what Rabbi Kook said, Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda said, it was embarrassing. We were a nation without a state. So for 2,000 years, we lived passively. We lived with our heads down. We lived embarrassed by our reality with no power. Rabbi Amital says, what are you talking about? For 2,000 years, we developed a moral tradition. We developed a backbone in terms of the strength of our commitment to ideals and to values. It may be true that we didn't wield the sword. We didn't wield the gun. We had no power. But we developed an alternative form of power, the power of our values to sustain us, because we were able to survive no matter what they did to us, because we were living for something beyond mere survival. And as much as they tried to defeat us and destroy us, we struggled because we knew there was something beyond, something higher that we were living for, the ideals on which we were raised. If we lose those ideals, we'll lose the motivation for being who we are. We will stop being who we are. That's the issue of survival. We may be, in other words, we may be defeated physically at times, but nevertheless, we were so-called victorious in our capacity to sustain our commitment to these ideals. That's what Rabbi Amital wants to argue for, and wants us to make sure that we understand that's what's sacred. That's what's sacred of our being, to uphold these lofty concepts. How dare people deride? How dare Ben-Gurion deride 2,000 years of exile? In exile, we developed a whole approach to the world that was novel and unique, that the world itself learned from. And the world itself actually, at times, those people who paid attention to what Jews were doing and saying, that they respected, certainly into the modern period when we promote these values. We cannot lose our attachment to those values. Rabbi, I bring some more writings of Rabbi Amital. We're going to have to skip through them. Those of you who can, I think you can ask to be sent the source packet because there's too much here. So I'd like to move on. So you will say to me, But you know what? What are you asking of us? No one in the world adheres to such a system. Why would you subject Israel and the Jews to a standard that's not upheld anywhere else? Right? That was the question we raised earlier about double standard. So here I want to draw on a figure that's little known. Not a rabbi, Moshe Una. Moshe Una was the secretary, the religious secretary of Kibbutz Yavne, a religious kibbutz. Some of you know it's near Rehovot. Yavne was made famous in the Talmud by Yochanan ben Zakkai when Yochanan ben Zakkai faced Vespasian after Vespasian had been appointed emperor, and after Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had prophesied or predicted that he would be called the emperor. So Vespasian asked Yochanan ben Zakkai, "What can I do for you?" After having jailed him, he seeing that he had risen to the top of the empire, so he asked Yochanan ben Zakkai, "What is it that you want?" And Yochanan ben Zakkai requests, "Ten li Yavne v'chachameha." Give me Yavne and its wise people. This is another lesson for us. What was going on at the time that Yochanan ben Zakkai, the rabbi, asked for Yavne? What was happening at that time? The revolt. The temple was about to be destroyed. Yochanan ben Zakkai, for some reason, and there's a puzzle, did not ask Vespasian to spare the temple. What he asked Vespasian to do in this sort of legendary encounter is, let's set up the future. While we are saying, in some ways, while the past is being left behind, meaning the past of a temple-centered culture is being left behind with all of its drawbacks and the revolt of the extremists in Jerusalem in the year 70, Yochanan ben Zakkai was saying, I want to prepare for a Judaism of the future. The Judaism when we will be not in power any longer, but we will have the power of the word. Learning will sustain us. Yavne and its wise men will sustain us. We're going to generate the Judaism that's going to survive for 2,000 years. Thank you, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Right? So Moshe Una was the spiritual leader of Kibbutz Yavne, which is located where the old Yavne, where the town of Yavne, near the town of Yavne. And Moshe Una says the following. I mean, and he writes this, if I'm not mistaken, he writes this in the 50s. Our awareness of an additional element, another nation within the land, presents us with ethical and humanitarian obligations. Ooh. Meaning, since there's another people living among us, it's not merely that we have to overpower them and make sure that they're not a threat, but we actually have obligations to those people. When the generation that left Egypt was commanded not to hate the Egyptians because they had been strangers in the land of Egypt, they were certainly shocked. How can we not hate those who killed our children and tried to strip us of the image of God? What obligations could we still owe them? However, ethical and humanitarian obligations. Right? I mean, here's Una. Una was an Orthodox Jew from whose family stemmed from Germany. So he was trying to shape what Amiel was trying to shape, a humanistic Zionism, a humanistic Judaism. Ethical and humanitarian obligations are not merely a calculation regarding the good of the other. In other words, we don't only behave ethically when the people we're opposing are also ethical. They are first and foremost about ourselves. Be ethical and fair for your own good, for the purity of your character, regardless of the ethics of the other person. They say to me, the whole world is against us. The nations of the world have sinned against us time and again. What do we owe them? Why do we have to examine every political action or practical step taken through the lens of ethics and humanitarianism? Right? Why are you demanding this of us? No one demands this of anybody. And you're demanding this of us. My answer, and of course our enemies, they don't fight this way. They don't care about these values. My answer, someone who stops examining the ethics of their actions because the other is not ethical removes themselves from the realm of the ethical as well. It is my soul, rather than humanity, that would be harmed. Do not conclude from my words that I am naive, about the true face of our enemy. I'm simply concerned with our Jewish face rather than the face of non-Jews, meaning I'm concerned with our behavior. That's my primary concern. And I will not, and I recognize, he said, that if we compromise on our commitment to values, then it will corrupt our commitment in general, and that slowly but surely we'll distance ourselves, and we won't, from those values, we won't see them as significant. We won't articulate them. They won't be part of the conversation, and it will no longer promote compassion and ethics as values that we should aspire to. If we don't hold ourselves to that standard of ethics. And I'm afraid to say that we need Una today to remind us further. I mean, this to me is amazing. In 1952, writing the platform for the religious kibbutz movement, Moshe Una writes the following: we should see foreign policy's primary goal as attaining permanent peace with the Arab countries. The state must contribute constructively to a solution to the Arab refugee problem, which is a substantive cause of political instability. You know anybody who says this today? That we have a responsibility to the Palestinians, right? That we have a responsibility to the Palestinians. The humanitarian aspect of the problem is also familiar to the Jewish people. This is Moshe Una saying, hey, my fellow Jews, you think you recognize this issue? You think you know a little bit about what it means to be a refugee? How are we behaving toward refugees? What's our standard? Would we like the world to behave to us in the way in which we are behaving towards them? So Moshe Una in 52 raises this issue. Unfortunately, we've let this issue, we no longer think that it's an issue. We don't even consider it to be our sense of our responsibility. It's the responsibility of the Arab world. Let them take care of it. They have 22 nations. This is what we say. They have 22 nations. We've been saying this all along. That's what we've been teaching. That's what we've been teaching in our schools. That's what people generally think. And that's the view of the dominant and the supreme. It's not the view of those who hold that they have a responsibility. Of course, we shouldn't be the only ones carrying the responsibility. But when we deny any responsibility, then I think we hurt ourselves and we hurt the possibilities of any resolution. I bring this quote from Martin Buber. We're not going to read it because I wanted to demonstrate that Buber, who held out the dream of binationalism, didn't give up, even after the state of Israel was declared. You don't give up. I mean, that's sort of my position. I'm not ready to give up. I'm especially not ready to give up when people on the ground in the state of Israel haven't given up. How dare I give up on the possibility of resolution and reconciliation if I know and I'm friendly with and I'm involved with efforts on the ground to bring about that reconciliation? So that's part of our responsibility. I want to conclude, and this is by the way the effort that I'm involved with, A Land for All. Unlike the classic two-state solution, this is sort of a one-paragraph summary, which is rooted in separation. Our platform has 4 significant advantages. It talks about confederation. It is more realistic in that it is not based on forced displacement or denial of rights. It doesn't call for the moving of any settlements. The Jews who want to live in the West Bank can continue to live there. They can live there if there's a state of Palestine. They can be citizens. They can be citizens of Israel, and they can be permanent residents of the state of Palestine. It better serves and the same is true of Palestinians. I mean, it's more complicated, but I want you to see that there are people who are working on the ground, Palestinians and Jews, including religious, including settlers. It better serves the party's deep interests, primarily the sense of belonging many feel towards the entire land. It doesn't require a split in the land. It's confederation, 2 states, but open borders. And it calls on us, all those who want to live here in dignity, peace, and pride, and believe it can be done, to work towards expanding the common good, work together for the betterment of all. I want to conclude with a teaching about peace, because I feel very strongly that we've sort of abandoned the conversation and the possibility and the vision of peace. And what I want you to see is this rabbinic midrash. The rabbinic midrash is as follows. The third time Moses taught God something was when the Holy One, blessed be God, said to Moses, wage war with Sichon, even if he does not seek to wage with you. You provoke war with him. As it is stated, rise and travel and cross da. But Moses did not do so. As it is written, I sent messengers to Sichon of Heshbon with an offer of peace. The Holy One, blessed be God, said to Moses, as you live, meaning I swear, I am nullifying my words and establishing your words. As it is stated, when you approach a city to wage war against it, you shall call it for peace. That's one of two sources. We don't have the time to go through the other one, but I wanted to demonstrate to you that God is willing to erase God's words. In a way, God is willing to nullify God's opinion in favor of Moses' opinion that peace is the ultimate value and has to override the impulse to war. The people who are waging war today wage war, the religious ones, in the name of God, as if they're raising God. There should be, in my opinion, less God and more humanity in their representation, less God and more peace-seeking than victory in their pursuit. Only in that way can we dream or hope that there can be a reshaping and a recommitment to the values that are at the center of Judaism and that I hope will once again be at the center of the Zionist enterprise. With that, I conclude, and we have some time for some questions. Please. I should stop my share?
I stopped the share. Thank you very much. I'm going to jump into questions because we have many and I collated them so that we can get most of them in. So I'm going back and start with, there was a question, can a military action by a recognized government that is done in error be fairly called a terrorist attack? And to put onto that question another, this was about the Kibbutz village.
Yes.
And about the fact that the world has falsely accused us of these sorts of atrocities so often, it's hard to know or discern at this point when the criticism is fair.
I didn't hear that second one. What's the second one?
When the world is accusing Israel time and time again, and sometimes falsely, about these sort of atrocities, it's very difficult to discern or know when the criticism is fair.
Okay. All right. I think that's a fair question. I know that. The point about Kibbutz is that as far as we know, there was no error, meaning no one bothered to check. Perhaps, I mean, you know, we can read the accounts, but no one seemed to check whether there were people in their homes, and it seems that there was some sense that there were civilians in the village. There were no soldiers. The reason that they attacked Kibbutz, by the way, was because it was close to where the attack on the mother and the two children, which occurred in Yahud. So it was a village that was close, and there was a need for an act that would deter. So there was no direct relationship. There was no assertion that the terrorists came from Kibbutz. You know, if someone did come up with that as justification, it certainly was not the reason that they chose. They chose it because it was close by. It was an example. And the point of the example was to demonstrate that we are serious, and we're going to show you that we're going to, you know, what we're willing to do in order for us to preserve our security. That's the challenge. Can we defend ourselves? Can we establish our security without acts of terror of this sort? Remember, maybe you're not aware of this. In the discussion of Kibbutz, Isaiah Leibovitz raised the whole question of the act of Simeon and Levi in raiding the city of Shechem when Dinah was raped, right, by the son of the ruler in Shechem. And then the brothers concocted a scheme where they required the Shechemites to circumcise. And on the third day, two of the brothers, Simeon and Levi, raided the town and massacred the males of the town. Now, what was the purpose of that massacre? Defending honor, right? The deterrence. That was the model that was used by the Israeli government. And Leibovitz raised the question and said, when we didn't have power and we claim to be moral, we really were not making any choice because we had no option. We had no power, so we had to be moral because we had no swords, we had no spears, we had no guns. The real problem, the real challenge to our morality enters when we have the power to exact some punishment. And then the challenge is, how do we behave, like everybody else or differently? Now, I began to be really scared when in the 90s, I was reading a journal published by the Settlers called Nikuda, and in their journal, there were a series of articles praising the raid of Simeon and Levi that killed the innocent Shechemites. I didn't understand where that was coming from. I had been, in all my learning, when we approached that passage, it was with a sense of embarrassment and reluctance and a need to either justify or somehow condemn, because Jacob, before he died, condemned the brothers and said he doesn't want to be mentioned in their context. He doesn't want to be seen as their father in a way. He didn't give them. Simeon and Levi did not inherit any land, even though Simeon eventually passed out of. We have no recollection in the later prophets of the tribe of Simeon, and the Levites didn't inherit any land. They were disempowered, right, disenfranchised by Jacob because of their act of violence. That's a condemnation. So the act in Gibeah, as Leibovich described it, was a parallel act to the biblical act. That's what I'm calling for. Some realization that that's not the way to go. Now, in terms of the way we're dealt with in the United Nations and in the international domain, I don't have a good answer. I don't know what to tell you, except for the following. That our best defense is that we stand by our morals, and because my sense is that we do have friends. We're not in a world without friends, and when the Europeans begin to abandon us, we're in trouble. When Germany begins to raise questions, Poland was the major supporter of Israel over the last number of years. The German government. And when you begin to hear the weakening of the support because of the violations on the part of the government of Israel, military violations, I think we should ask ourselves some serious questions. How can we afford that? Who are we? There's a dimension of arrogance that's crept into our position. That's why I'm calling for a religious conversation. The religious conversation has to introduce something that we haven't spent enough time dealing with in our conversation, and that's a sense of humility. Who are we? We are, after all, a small country with a lot of power, but we're a small country, and we need to recognize who we are. And it's not honest, and it's not fair for us to represent us as the Jews against the world. That need not be. That isn't what we dreamt of, and the position that we need to be in. We do have friends. We need to cultivate that friendship and that support. I remember the support in 1979 after the peace treaty was signed between Begin and Sadat. Remember those days. Remember the possibility. Remember how that's been so significant for Israel's survival and Israel's security. Are we willing today to make similar compromises for our survival and our security in the name of peace?
Okay, I'm going to jump into another bunch of questions that came in different directions, and it's about the balance between survival and holding on to the ideals. One of the questions was, would you give up the state for the ideals? Where do you draw the line? And also, how can we be responsible for those who kill and murder us? And the example that was brought up were the people who worked for peace at the Gaza border and were murdered on October 7th.
So that's an easy question. Of course, the children of the people who were murdered, who were working towards peace, I think almost all of them are still working for peace. Right. So I mean, what right do I have to be more righteous than they are? In other words, they haven't concluded they killed my mother, therefore I should abandon the quest for peace. They've doubled down in terms of their commitment and continue to work for the same values and the same ideals. And you know, I see that more or less. You know, that's where people have come down. What was the first question?
Would you give up the state for your
Would I
ideals,
give up the
and where
state?
do you
No, I
draw
would
the
not. I
line?
would not. I would not give up the state, because what I'm calling for is that we have to pursue our survival, but while still maintaining our commitment to our values. That doesn't mean, remember, that doesn't mean we don't have a right, not only a right, an obligation to defend ourselves. Defense is always required. But the question that I'm raising is beyond the defense. How do we behave? What's our outlook? Do we recognize that even our defense, which is necessary, is also somehow tainted because we have to take lives? Do we understand that? Now, I don't mean that the soldier should enter into the warfare hesitating, because that makes that's self-defeating. The soldier has to be committed to defend the state of Israel and use all his might that's possible to defend the state of Israel. But the soldier also needs some restraint when the act that he's involved with is not a fulfillment of that defense of survival. Meaning, when you capture enemy soldiers, you treat them with dignity. You don't bury them in a mass grave and hide the act of your defense if you claim that it was an act of defense. That's just recent, right? That's what I'm talking about. You don't lose your humanity in your self-defense. Of course you need to fight for defense. And it's a false accusation to say that because I'm promoting values, I'm not accusing the questioner, but I'm saying those who raise this question, because I am promoting values, that I'm weak on our survival. Our survival is necessary. The state of Israel is not to be abandoned. Of course not. But what type of state of Israel is it going to be? That's what I'm struggling for. That's what I want us to hold on to. Any more questions?
There are more, but we'll end with this one. Are there any contemporary thinkers, rabbis, journalists, leaders, maybe women, that you read or follow that give you hope, or that you think that their opinion can shed light on different aspects than what we're seeing? Who do you recommend for us to read or follow or seek out?
So, interesting. There's a young person in whose writing I respect enormously. His name is Michael Manikin. He's written a number of essays that draw on, or that try to promote this perspective. There are others. The problem is that, as far as I know, their writing is only in Hebrew. So Michael Manikin wrote a book. Let me recommend it to you. It's here it is. 1 second, I have to find it in my pile. The book is called End of Days: Ethics, Tradition, and Power in Israel. It's precisely what we are talking about: ethics, tradition, and power in Israel. In fact, I might have taken some of my sources from Michael's writing. There are others, as I said, most of them are writing in Hebrew. But I do want to end, if you give me a moment, I do want to end with a quote that I think is very telling. It's a quote from Nachum Goldman. Some of you are old enough to remember, or most of you are old enough to remember, Nachum Goldman was the chairman of the World Zionist Congress and of the World Jewish Congress simultaneously. He was sort of the foreign minister of the Jewish people in the 70s. And he wrote as follows: "For 2,000 years, we Jews have lived without power. And without power, we form the noblest visions and highest ideals. Now we have power. In Israel, we have a flag, an army, an air force, an intelligence apparatus, the envy of every nation in the region. And in America, we have wealth, and status and political influence. Yes, we have power, but we have not yet learned to use that power in the service of our ideals. So it is that the Jewish people has never been more threatened than it is today. For what is threatened is the ethical core of our being, the ethos of the Jewish people. Thank you very much. That's really the message I've tried to deliver. And I hope that we can promote this idea into the future. Thank you.